Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard. But it takes a paradoxical and humble courage to grasp the whole temporal realm by virtue of the absurd, and this is the courage of faith. By faith Abraham did not renounce Isaac, but by faith Abraham received Isaac. By virtue of resignation, the rich young man should have given away everything, and if he had done so, the knight of faith would have said, by virtue of the absurd, you will get every penny back again. Believe it! And the formerly rich young man should by no means treat these words lightly. For if he were to give away his possessions because he was bored with them, then his resignation would not amount to much. He who loves God without faith reflects upon himself. He who loves God in faith reflects upon God. This is the peak on which Abraham stands. The last stage to pass from his view is the stage of infinite resignation. He actually goes further and comes to faith. Through resignation, I renounce everything. I make this movement all by myself. And if I do not make it, it is because I am too cowardly and soft and devoid of enthusiasm, and do not feel that significance of the high dignity assigned to every human being to be his own censor, which is far more exalted than to be the censor general of the whole Roman Republic. This movement I make all myself, and what I gain thereby is my eternal consciousness in blessed harmony with my love for the eternal being. By faith I do not renounce everything. On the contrary, by faith I receive everything. Exactly in the sense in which it is said that one who has faith like a mustard seed can move mountains. It is supposed to be difficult to understand Hegel, but to understand Abraham is a small matter. To go beyond Hegel is a miraculous achievement, but to go beyond Abraham is the easiest of all. I, for my part, have applied considerable time to understanding Hegelian philosophy, and believe that I have understood it fairly well. I am sufficiently brash to think that when I cannot understand particular passages, despite all my pains, he himself may not have been entirely clear. Well, this I do easily, naturally, without any mental strain. Thinking about Abraham is another matter. However, then I am shattered. Problema 1. Is there such a thing as a teleological suspension of the ethical? If there is the case, then Hegel is right in The Good and the Conscience, where he qualifies man only as the individual, and considers this qualification as a moral form of evil from the philosophy of right, which must be annulled in the teleology of the moral in such a way that the single individual who remains in that stage either sins or is immersed in a spiritual trial. But Hegel is wrong in speaking about faith. He is wrong in not protesting loudly and clearly against Abraham's enjoying honor and glory as a father of faith when he ought to be sent back to a lower court and shown up for a murderer. Faith is namely this paradox that the single individual is higher than the universal. Yet, please note in such a way that the movement repeats itself, so that after having been in the universal, he as the single individual isolates himself as higher than the universal. If this is not faith, then Abraham is lost. Then faith has never existed in the world, precisely because it has always existed. For if the ethical, that is, social morality, is the highest, then no categories are needed other than the Greek philosophical categories. It is certainly true that many persons may be so constituted that they are repulsed by it, by faith, ought not therefore to be made into something else to enable one to have it. But one ought rather to admit to not having it, while those who have faith ought to be prepared to set forth some characteristics. The paradox can be distinguished from the spiritual trial. How did Abraham exist? He had faith. This is the paradox by which he remains at the apex. The paradox that he cannot explain to anyone else. For the paradox is that he, as the single individual, places himself in an absolute relation to the absolute. It is a simple matter to level all existence to the idea of the state or the idea of a society. If this is done, it is also simple to mediate. For one never comes to the paradox that the single individual, as the single individual, is higher than the universal. Something I can also express symbolically in a statement by Pythagoras to the effect that the odd number is more perfect than the even number. When in our age we hear these words, it will be judged by the result. Then we know at once with whom we have the honor of speaking. Those who talk this way are a numerous type whom I shall designate under the common name of assistant professors. A person might have been born in lowly circumstances, but I would still require him not to be so inhuman toward himself that he could imagine the king's castle only at a distance and ambiguously dream of its greatness and destroy it at the same time he elevates it, because he elevated it so basely. I require him to be man enough to tread confidently and with dignity there as well. He must not be so inhuman that he insolently violates everything by bargaining right off the street into the king's hall. He loses more thereby than the king. On the contrary, he should find a joy in observing every bidding of propriety with a happy and confident enthusiasm, which is precisely what makes him a free spirit. But we are curious about the result, just as we are curious about the way a book turns out. We do not want to know anything about the anxiety, the distress, the paradox. We carry on in an aesthetic flirtation with the result. To explain the whole of existence and faith along with it, without having a conception of what faith is easy. And that man does not make the poorest calculation in life who reckons upon admiration when he possesses such an explanation, for as Boileau says, un sort trouve toujours un plus soquet l'aimerait. It is great when the poet, presenting his tragic hero before the admiration of men, dares to say, "Weep for him, for he deserves it." For it is great to deserve the tears of those who are worthy to shed tears. It is great that the poet dares to hold the crowd in check, dares to castigate men, requiring that every man examine himself whether he be worthy to weep for the hero. For the waste water of blubberers is a degradation of the holy. But greater than all this, it is that the knight of faith dares to say even to the noblemen who would weep for him, "Weep not for me, but weep for thyself." To be sure, Mary bore the child wondrously, but she nevertheless did it after the manner of woman, and such a time is one of anxiety, distress, and paradox. The angel was indeed a ministering spirit, but he was not a meddlesome spirit who went to the other young maidens in Israel and said, "Do not scorn Mary. The extraordinary is happening to her." The angel went only to Mary, and no one could understand her. Has any woman been as infringed upon as Mary? And is it not true here also that the one whom God blesses, he curses in the same breath? Mary became the mother of God. She needs worldly admiration as little as Abraham needs tears. For she was no heroine and he was no hero, but both of them became greater than these, not by being exempted in any way from the distress and the agony of the paradox, but became greater by means of these. But I come back to Abraham. During the time before the result, either Abraham was a murderer every minute or we stand before a paradox that is higher than all mediation. The story of Abraham contains a teleological suspension of the ethical. As the single individual, he became higher than the universal. This is the paradox, which cannot be mediated. How he entered into it is just as inexplicable as how he remains in it. Faith is a marvel, and yet no human being is excluded from it. For that which unites all human life is passion, and faith is passion.